Student Peace Prize 2023. The Student Peace Prize is a prize given out on behalf of all Norwegian students to a student or a student organization working to promote peace, democracy, and human rights. We are a prize by students for students. The Student Peace Prize is a way to celebrate and recognize the important and brave work that is being done by students all over the world every single day. In times of crisis, it is student activism that has been a crucial force of contributing to bigger social change. And even though we are a vital part of this, students, they don't get the recognition they deserve, and they are often neglected by both politicians and the media. Students, they have been at the forefront when peace and freedom have been under threat. We are the first ones to take to the streets and demand change in the name of peace and freedom, but are at the same time the first ones to be forgotten. Since 1999, the Student Peace Prize has strived to recognize these students. Some of our earlier winners, they have lost their right to study. Some have got their rights violated. Others have been persecuted. Some in prison, and someone even tortured. And despite this, and despite their circumstances and all their challenges, they have refused to give up. They have constantly working towards change for a better tomorrow. For example, Ayat al-Kurmesi, who won the prize in 2015, she used poems criticizing the royal family in Bahrain. At one of her poems reading, it led to her being arrested. And despite of the sexual discrimination and torture she experienced during her time in prison, she has continued to work for equality. Or Hasher Sharif, who won the prize in 2017. Last month, she took the initiative of inviting representatives from the rival government in Libya to peace talks at Utøya here in Norway. Some of the representatives they had earlier refused to even be in the same room. And Hasher, she continues to work for the inclusion of women and young people in peace-building processes in Libya. Or Masheed Tavakoli, who won the prize in 2013. At the present time, he is imprisoned in the notorious Evin prison in Iran, along with other political prisoners. And Masheed, he has been promoting democracy and human rights in Iran for many, many years. And before his arrest, he played a key role in exposing the case of Sheena Amini, which you all know was brutally killed by the morality police some weeks ago. So we will continue to support Masheed, and we will continue to tell his story, because this is what we work for. We have the possibility to set the agenda and put the spotlight on these cases that so often are forgotten. And this spotlight, it's not meant for glory, but for visibility, for the world to see a face and a story together with a voice that speaks for change. We assure them that they will not be alone and that they are not invisible. We hear their story and we recognize their work and their activism. We hear them, we support them, and we will continue to stand in solidarity with them. The Student Peace Prize will be awarded during ISFIT, the world's largest international student festival. And what better place to be awarded a prize than in the presence of hundreds of students from over 100 countries. Here, the winner will meet the whole world right here in Trondheim, and they will feel the power of the entire student community is standing together with them. So we will never underestimate the power of student activists. Students at the forefront are one of the biggest hope for the future of peace. Students, they are not just the leaders of tomorrow. We are the leaders of today. And I would also like to speak about how we got to this year's winner of the prize. The nomination committee, it consisted of 6 students from different universities in Norway. We had Sofie Kalgaard, Simon Sarif, Kristin Hagen, Fredrik Iversen, Frida Sari, and Sofie Christensen. They have filtered and researched a lot of nomination resulting in a report with 5 candidates, which was all very qualified for the prize. So I would very much like to thank them for their engagement and their dedication to the work. They handed the report to the Peace Prize Committee, who this year was led by Hector Ulla, and had the following expert members: Gro Lindstad, Christian Berg Harpiken, Lindis Hurum, and Henriette Kille-Vestrin, and the following student members: Bjørn Olav Østeby, Maika Godal Dam, Marte Lind, and Åse Vigdisdatter Nytrø. On the 8th of August this year, they sat together and decided who will be awarded the Student Peace Prize of 2023. I would also like to present tonight's program. After I am done talking, we will introduce Hector to finally reveal to you all who will be awarded the Student Peace Prize of 2023. After the reveal, we will show a movie made by the film team in Isfit. Later, we will hear a speech by Maika and Bjørn Olav from the Norwegian Student Organization. We also have the honor of having Candice here to perform for us tonight, so we can all look forward to that. After the break, we will have a panel discussion led by Hector, together with Bente Roaldsvik from Fritt Ord, Geir Flikke, a professor at the University in Oslo, and Ole Christian Strøm, a journalist from VG. Later this evening, we're also having an after party at Klubben. Some weeks ago, I had the great pleasure of visiting the winner of 2023. The winner are honored to receive this year's Student Peace Prize and says that it signifies that all their work for student rights, political prisoners, and freedom of speech was not in vain. So everyone, let me introduce Hector Ulla to finally reveal to you all who will be awarded the Student Peace Prize of 2023. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Hector Ulloa. I am the president of the Norwegian Students and Academics International Assistance Fund. And this year, I've had the honor of leading the Student Peace Prize Peace Committee. The Student Peace Prize seeks to celebrate the often ignored vital role that students play in society. Students' engagement and dedication has time after time become a defining factor during some of the most critical times of our history. And today, we're honoring students who continue to fight for the right of others, even in the harshest conditions. As a former student activist from Honduras, I have seen and experienced the extent to which authoritarian leaders are willing to go to silence the voices of students. Tear gas, expulsions, arrests, discrimination, and even death are all measures that have been used against students, activists all over the world. A vibrant student movement is an integral part of higher education, but in times of democratic backlash and increased populism, it has become harder and harder to be an activist. Student activists are also guardians of one of the most precious things our educational system gives us: critical thinking. With this prize, we want to shine light on the life and circumstances of student activists whose local actions inspire global admiration. We want to show that solidarity matters. As it was mentioned, the Peace Committee has been led by me as president of SAI and consisted of the following expert members. I'll repeat them once again: Gro Lindstad, Christian Berg Harpviken, Lindis Hurum, and Henriette Kille-Vestrin. And also the following student members: Bjørn Olav Østeby, Maika Maria Godal, Marte Lind, and Åse Vigdisdatter. On behalf of all students in Norway, the Peace Prize Committee has decided that the Student Peace Prize for 2023 is to be awarded to Doxa magazine from Russia. Doxa is an online student-led magazine founded in 2017 at the Higher School of Economics in Moscow. The magazine focuses on topics related to academia, but has also reported on the political persecution suffered by students in Russia, and more recently, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Doxa are awarded the prize for their brave work exposing corruption and sexual harassment at universities, documenting state persecution, and for their fight against government disinformation. This committee hopes that in receiving the prize, Doxa magazine's work will obtain increased attention. With this prize, we also want to highlight the important role that students have taken in opposing the current authoritarian rule in Russia. Doxa's story is about students fighting back at injustice with words based on a conviction that young people have the right to be heard, and also the right to information. Russia's authoritarianism has increasingly become visible to the rest of the world. That is the context within which Doxa operates, attempting to exercise their freedom of expression and press. Their work has shown the world the reality of Russian censorship, as they report on the situation for students who are politically persecuted, censored due to their academic work, or expelled from their institutions for raising criticism. In recent years, the Russian state has become more and more hostile to critical voices within their borders. Protests are violently dispersed, thousands have been arrested for expressing their opinion, and human rights organizations are now categorized as foreign agents by the Kremlin. When members of Doxa supported the students who were taking part in the 2019 opposition protests, they were cut off from their university, and 4 of their founders suffered raids at their home, physical violence, and also house arrests. In essence, they had a wide range of their essential civil rights denied. These actions came after the magazine published a short video explaining that it was illegal for universities to sanction students for participating in the protests. Doxa is at the forefront in today's fight for free, independent media and the right to free expression. Due to threats and persecution, the magazine works through a network of editors who live in exile, local informants, and also anonymous journalists, all of which are either students or recent graduates. This complex mode of work demonstrates how opposition forces can innovate to continue operating even under extremely harsh conditions. Doxa's work highlights the importance also of not cutting ties with critical actors living under authoritarianism. They need to know that their opposition is being recognized. These critical actors will be essential to the reconstruction of free and democratic societies in the future. The Peace Prize Committee for the Student Peace Prize wishes to highlight the impact that this year's winner has on the fight for peace, democracy, and human rights. We hope that the prize will bring meaningful support to Doxa's efforts to give the underrepresented a voice and show that students need to be heard. Doxa magazine is a worthy recipient of the Student Peace Prize 2023 due to their determination to keep fighting for justice and freedom of expression despite the brutal attacks that they have suffered from their own government. Student activists are among the first targets for repressive authoritarian leaders. This year's winner represents a ray of hope in a period of democratic backlash. Their work has the potential to inspire action in many countries worldwide. But now, it is time to hear from them. Congratulations, Doxa.
Students are fighting in the dark. Peace is about dialogue and understanding. ISFIT and the Student Peace Prize is all about learning by listening to what others have to say.
Of students fighting for peace, democracy and human rights.
We are the future.
We are breaking down the barriers.
Independent media were blocked. Many social media platforms were also blocked, platforms like Facebook, Instagram. Many of the media and journalists were really scared at the beginning of invasion because there was this expectation that Russian government will arrest a lot of people, will put a lot of people in prisons, and a lot of media projects were closing down like in seconds and days. It wasn't a matter of these 2 weeks after the invasion, it was part of a longer history of Russian repression against activists, against journalists. And in this situation we became one of the few independent media and sources of information for people in Russia, and especially young people.
Doxa is a Russian independent media made by young Russians.
It was started, I think, 6 years ago by a small group of students from higher school economics.
We were writing mostly about students' life and universities, but now we are covering the war in Ukraine, the war crimes that are made in the modern world, and we are writing about inequality, human rights in Russia.
Youth activism, gender issues, basically everything that interests our audience.
So basically our big aim is to provide a site where young Russians can exchange ideas and be heard.
Even at this moment, Russian independent media are kind of living through a very serious crisis, where they have to reimagine the way to deliver the content to the audience in the situation of this kind of very massive censorship. But currently, I think we succeed.
People are still resistant, and every day somebody is arrested for this resistance.
There is still hope. There is still a lot of people. It's not like all the people who were anti-war left Russia, and all the people who stayed in Russia are some kind of Putinist people without their own consciousness. And we tried to maintain this idea because it's really important for people in Russia who are still opposed to the war not to lose hope, not to lose this sense of being a part of a broader movement. That is something that we tried to convey to our audience.
That's the only way to stop the war, to get to some democracy all over the world, and to rebuild our society.
To build a dialogue and to not to be polarized, because there is no time for polarization, there is a time for change and for solidarity. It's very important to see that our work, our mission and our values is shared, and most importantly is validated. So we feel very, very, very grateful and happy to receive the prize this year.
First of all, I would like to say thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this event and this prize of great importance. My name is Maika Marie Godal Dam. I'm the president of the National Union of Students in Norway, or Norsk Studentorganisasjon, as we say in Norwegian. And together with me, I have
Bjørn Olav Østerby, the international officer.
Yes. Together, we represent more than 260,000 students from all over Norway. The Student Peace Prize is rewarded on behalf of all Norwegian students. From students in the northmost part of Norway to the southernmost, we are very proud to say that every student is part of this. Higher education is important for social development, democracy, and liberation from oppression. Therefore, it is an important principle that knowledge and education should be available to everyone.
Thank you. In many countries around the world, students risk persecution and violence if they work for rights that we have in Norway and that we take for granted. Academics and students must be guaranteed academic freedom and the opportunity to participate in social debate. Political repression and attacks on academic freedom damage the quality and the trust in education and research. Norwegian students therefore work actively to improve the rights of those students who are not as well off as we are. NSO collaborates with, amongst others, SI, the Norwegian Students and Academics International Assistance Fund, but also with the Student Peace Prize Secretariat to shine a spotlight on countries and areas where student rights are threatened, and to support those who work for the same as us under work conditions. That is why our National Assembly in April decided in our plan of work to prioritize students who are faced by threats, war, or conflicts, and to show our solidarity with them. That is why our board earlier this day, only a few hours ago, adopted a resolution about the situation in Iran. And that is why also the executive committee chose to sign a petition about students in Ukraine and to attend a demonstration for Ukraine earlier this fall. The increased globalization means that students' interests more than ever are linked to the challenges faced by fellow students in other countries. Global student solidarity is therefore important to safeguard, and a global community of knowledge creates arenas where people can come together and to solve the world's challenges.
The students of Norway stands shoulder to shoulder with our fellow students globally and support other students and voluntary student organizations all around the world in the fight for human rights, peace, and democracy. Thank you.
We will have the great pleasure of having Candice here tonight to perform for us.
Sjampisen sprudler over kandiser og fyll opp våre glass. Sorte og rosa, vi vil stå på så lenge som vi kan gå. For vi har kondis, kandis står på natta lang med en sang. Med en sang.
We are Kandis, a student choir from this very building, Studentersamfundet, the student society. And we are so grateful and honored to be able to sing for you today. We live in uncertain times with ongoing conflicts, and the work of the winner Doxa is so it's very important, and it is a bit of a contrast to what we do usually, which is to sing and trying to be funny. But we believe that music is a small way to contribute to all of the world's challenges. So therefore we will sing for you today a song about being yourself.
Der snublet du og falt igjen. Sjelen fikk noen nye skrubbsårmenn. Børsta knærne, du skal se at det går bra. Hen fram den du en gang var, tøff og stolt og dyrebar, som elsket alle farver i livet ga. Alt det som du er og var, har du fortsatt i deg. Ikke tenk for mye, la, 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 la. Du vil møte frosker og dumme menn, men også fine folk som blir igjen, som lar deg være. Fortsatt i deg. Ikke tenk for mye, la, 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 Dikt ditt eget eventyr av sorg og glede som livet byr. Stjernen er der, den skinner inn i deg. Bli alt du har, alt det som du er og var, det finnes fortsatt i deg. Ikke tenk for mye, for med alt jeg har, alt det som jeg er og var, vil jeg være med deg.
we are all female students at NTNU. And that is something that I could not have said so many years ago. We, or Candice, celebrated our 40th Jubilee this spring. And during that whole weekend of celebration, we sang a song that Candice wrote 40 years ago in 1982, which tells a story about how being a female student wasn't the same back then as it is now. And we want to sing that song for you. It's called NTH Lade.
Fra NTH Lade og fra ergoterapi til ingeniør og sykepleier vil vi en gang bli. Det er ikke nok å være liten inn i Trondheims by. For lønn og karriere frister mer enn Lady D. For nå går alle jentene på skolen. Men så var skolen slutt og jobben ventet, trodde vi. Det eneste jeg huka var en vaskejobb å si. Jeg søkte andre jobber, personalsjefen sa nei. Du blir gravid, du stanser liv, vi har ikke bruk for deg. For vi må ha en mann i denne stolen. Nei, har du ikke gitt opp, har du ennå ikke skjønt at uten manneposisjon og penger er du dømt? Nei, har du ikke tittelen fru sivilingeniør, da blir du ikke regnet med.
Det skulle jeg ha tenkt på før.
Du kastet bort din ungdom der på skolen. Nei, kom igjen nå, jenter, dette her går ikke an. Snart må da alle innse vi har like god forstand som mannen som fikk posisjon på grunn av rette kjønn. All utdanning er like bra, nå krever vi litt lønn. La jentene få plassen der i solen. At piker, vin og sang, det hører sammen, har vi hørt. Det brukes ofte som refreng, men vi blir aldri spurt. Nå vil vi synge sangen sjøl og drikke vodkaen bar. Det eneste vi ikke fikser, det er å bli far. Men jobber nå med saken her på skolen. Candice er navnet folkens lytte etter nå. Her skal det virkelig ringe. Ragtime og jazze er litt på virken nå. Candice bøyer.
Thank you to Candice for their great performance. Now we will have a 15-minute break. And during the break, the bar are open down in Rundhallen, so you can go there if you want to. And after the break, we will start with the panel discussion. So I'll see you all in 15 minutes. Thank you.
Can you hear me now? Yes. Welcome back, everyone. Now we're going to have a panel conversation. We have a very good panel with us today. What we're going to be discussing is a little bit about the context for everyone to understand what's happening in Russia, what's the context under which Doxa magazine is operating, and also go a little bit more into what are the challenges when we talk about freedom of press, freedom of expression, what are journalists facing under these authoritarian contexts, and then dig a little bit deeper into the winners, Doxa, and the work they have done and what their editorial team has also been facing. So in order to have this discussion, we have with us today Bente Roalsvig. She is a project and deputy director at the Fritt Ord Foundation, a private non-profit foundation that seeks to promote freedom of expression, public debate, art, and culture. She is, among other things, working with the Free Media Awards, press prizes, providing support for journalists and media that report independently in Eastern Europe. This year, the foundation awarded the Fritt Ord Foundation Prize for 2022 to the online Russian newspaper Medusa for courageous, independent, and fact-based journalism. Welcome, Bente. We also have with us Ole Christian Strøm. He has a degree in economics from the Norwegian University of Life Sciences, studied Russian and Russian politics at the Moscow State University, and has worked in different positions at the newspaper VG since 1987, and made frequent travels to, but also lived in Russia since 1995. Welcome, Ole Christian. And we also have Geir Flikke. From 2002 to 2006, he has worked as a researcher at the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs. And in 2006, he was promoted to assistant director there. From 2013, he has also been working at the University of Oslo. He's now a professor there and specializes in Russian studies. Welcome, Geir. And to start this discussion, I have asked all of you to prepare a 3-minute opinion or context setting on the winners, today's winners. So we can start with you, Geir, and then go all the way there. What is your reflection?
I have to say, first of all, thank you to the organizers for inviting me to take part in this discussion. And I think that this year you have actually chosen not only a worthy recipient, but simply also a very important recipient. Important for several reasons. The first reason is that as we speak, the Russian language media, among others, Medusa for instance, are writing about how things are changing in the university sector in the Russian Federation. There's a lot of focus on how a moderately conservative regime is turning into a more authoritarian conservative regime, and with the changes and implication that has for the educational sector as such. And that, for instance, would involve curriculum changes. It would involve new books on history, revisions on how history is being taught in the university sector. And that comes in addition to the fact that also since Doxa was created in 2017 and onwards, you have also seen that students have been taken to the streets, taking part in protests, with the consequences for themselves, personally, economically, and also for their families. There was one, Yegor Zhukov, for instance, who studied at the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, who participated in the demonstrations in 2019. And he was not only trialed, he was also under pressure for losing his right to be a student at the university. And I remember his name particularly because his father wrote a very touching poem in the main newspaper, liberal newspaper, which is called Novaya Gazeta, where he said that this generation, we thought we never would return to the Soviet times, but it seems that for this generation, there is a danger that we will. And those words made a huge impression on me. And of course, also, when the cases were raised against the Doxa editors, the 4 of them, we saw one of them in here in the video cut. I also followed the way that they used the courtroom as some kind of rostrum for holding speeches where they appealed to the right to express themselves for peace, for freedom, no to sexual harassment at universities and all these things. So the students, or the editors and the students that they represent, they came across as being, top-notch defenders of human rights. So I think you have made an excellent choice.
Thank you. We'll come back to some of the points you have raised, Geir, but Ole Christian, what do you think of this year's winner?
Yeah, it's for sure important. I mean, the situation for Russian media is really bad. All TV stations, all newspapers are controlled by the Kremlin or their reporters. There are some independent medias outside Russia, like Doxa, like Medusa, and old Russians, they get all their information through these state-controlled medias, and therefore their picture of the war is how the Kremlin wants it to be. Doxa makes an alternative. They, although they are situated outside Russia, they have their stringers inside Russia. They have their contacts, and they probably use the internet, the telephone, and they are very, very important, especially for young people, because young people in Russia get more information from internet than old people, and therefore, like Doxa and Medusa, I think the two most important ones, is an alternative for getting the real truth about the war going on in the Ukraine.
Thank you. Your opinion, Bente?
Yes, I really think the choice is excellent. Doxa broke ground being a student-led publication of highest quality, I must say, including also quite an edgy one. They have also pushed, other independent media outlets in Russia to cover topics like gender equality, sexuality, other liberal issues. And Doxa, we all know it's Greek. It means, to learn, to make an opinion, and freedom of expression, different kinds of freedoms like freedom of assembly, freedom of thought is a part of the bigger picture. And I think they are really, good at focusing on, the constitutional rights, students' rights, but also the rights of professors, for example. They are, covering topics, problems like you see in the Russian universities today. I would fully recommend all of you to follow them on Instagram. I think they have like 116,000 followers. It's quite good even for people who don't speak Russian, because it's possible to translate, shorter texts. They are very informative about the war in the Ukraine now, and also how, the Russian regime are trying to, pick young men here and there and bring them into war. And I saw Instagram, one post during the last 24 hours was, how to flee from the country, where are the zones open, which countries is it possible to, travel to. It's quite impressive, and it's also, I would say, creatively done. They also use a lot of humor, etc. And they also have a very cool new web page. They launched it just a week ago. Hopefully, it will be in English within some months. Who knows? So this is the quality. The quality is very, very good. It's brilliant and playful and witty and serious. It contains everything. But I would also like to say that I think, giving this award to Doxa in this time of war is so important. It's an act of solidarity. And it's also very important, to build bridges between different regions and societies, It will be one of the most, important thing we can do in the years to come, I think, during war and also after war.
Thank you. And that's one of the main points about showing solidarity, so I'm very happy you brought it
Yeah.
up again. But we know that they are doing this creative way, they're working through social media as well. But what's the reality when it comes to the criminalization that they're facing? Because sometimes if you haven't experienced it, or if it's hard to understand, like, how do they criminalize you if you're expressing your opinion in a country like Russia, for example? What's the framework? Maybe you could give us some insight, guide.
Oh, well, yeah, I most certainly can, but that is based on a research project that I was doing for the University of Oslo in the period from 2014 to 2017. And we were looking at ways in which, NGOs and other solidarity movements could actually have an effect, or they could, do some advisory work or things like that for the Russian state. And also how people organized once they mobilized, how they organized, the way they worked, and so forth. And one of the findings of that study was that actually, and this is quite surprising, that the knowledge that the Russian civil society has about law and legal issues is very high. Sometimes you say it's even better than what the regime has. They really understand how the laws work. They really understand where the red lines and the gray zones are, and so forth. And until now, they have been able to maneuver in that very particular landscape. But over time, the Russian states have changed the laws, severed the laws, and also, made punishments for any kind of transgression of a revised law much more with larger consequences. So let us say what they can do is that they have something they call the administrative codex. The administrative codex means that if anyone takes part in a demonstration which is not coordinated, with the city or the local authorities and so forth, they can be sent into prison for between 15 and 30 days. And that is also a violation of, calling people to demonstrations in social media, for instance, is also punishable through the administrative law. If that doesn't work, you can tell the student that if you do not behave, for instance, or if you repeatedly take part in demonstrations, you will lose your right to be a student. And that is a severe punishment for a student because it has career consequences and so forth. During the last 2 years only, they have also amended the criminal code. And now it's possible that if you spread information about the war, for instance, you can receive up to 2 years imprisonment and all the way up to 15 years, depending on what kind of information you distribute through social media. That is a whole new area, a whole new field of punishment. The punishments are really severe. Of course, students now face a very difficult choice of staying in Russia or leaving Russia. And sometimes you could say that, well, maybe the whole purpose of this is for the regime to say that the most protest-willing students should go, with consequences for those who stay. So again, and this is, this is something that you should keep in mind. You should have a continuous attention to these people. See how they're doing, follow up, and be very attentive to what happens to them.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes, and I would also like to bring in the concept of being a foreign agent, which has been quite crucial during the last years. It's, a labeling of an organization or a person being someone who is more or less a stringer for foreign powers, So, for example, if a Russian media outlet receives money from a foundation in Western Europe, then you are, in a way, walking their walk, so to say, instead of your own. So it's a way of smearing people. And the Russian regime started to introduce these kinds of laws some years back, primarily towards human rights organizations, non-governmental organizations. But during the last years, we have also seen that they have started to label media organizations for foreign agents. And even a year or so before the war started, we saw that they started to target and also single out journalists, like you are a foreign agent. And then people started to become quite nervous. Some flew already then before the war. And I remember last autumn when we were on our way to invite some journalists to Oslo, actually. Then they were afraid of coming because they were so frightened to become some sort of foreign agents, just being invited and giving a speech, for example, or taking part in a conversation. So this kind of concept really, you know, embraced so many after a while.
Yes. And we also say it's good that you're dealing with foreign agents, because that's something that it's very noticeable how other countries, you know, they're always like copying the authoritarian leaders. They would seem like they copy each other. And this thing with these frameworks about foreign agents, now we see them in Latin America, we see them in Africa as well. And I feel if we see, or if we can learn from, for example, Doxa, on how do you fight back when these kind of frameworks come into place, then other people around the world can also learn from that and fight back, now that we see that these laws are being copied. And that was going to be my next question to both of you, Bente and Ole Christian, on about under this framework that Gate explained right now, when you have this criminalization, you have these sanctions, and we know Doxa, besides being students through their activism, they're journalists. How do you do journalism then, or how does it look to do journalism under these harsh conditions? If you have some reflections on that.
Yeah, yes, of course, it's really difficult, because they had to fly from Russia. They have to. I mean, you're a better journalist if you work at the place where things is happening. But they use their stringers. They use their contacts, so they make very good journalism, although they are situated abroad. And but of course, it will be more and more difficult for the further they will be away from Russia, because they lose their contacts, and perhaps also their contacts has to fly, and yeah, there will be a very difficult, and that is how the authorities want it to be.
Yeah. Do you have any comments? How can they act then? What new ways are for journalists? What are journalists doing to fight this?
Yes, first and foremost, I would say that, you know, they leave their country, their family, you know, their friends, their workplace. It's a very depressing scenario, very challenging. And they don't even have, you know, their own bank accounts anymore. If you have had savings, for example, you can't, you know, have your own savings. And you're coming to a completely new country without anything, and you have to try to start to build up everything anew, in a way. I fully believe that the international society have been quite, you know, good, you know, assisting how to teach them the new, you know, media laws, for example, in the place they live. And they have also provided a lot of psychological help, which is important. And also speaking of accounting has been, you know, important to learn to count in, yeah. So the help has been there, and, you know, some of the journalists in Russia are among the best journalists in the world, in a way. So they are good at, you know, operating in challenging times. So maybe just a few years back, we would consider people who left their country for, you know, being out of touch with the local development. So it was a way of, oh my God, this journalist, he or she fled, you know, the actuality, the credibility of this person is lost. But this is not the situation anymore, I would say, because we have this kind of, I mean, it's not this wall anymore, you know, because you have people working outside of Russia, and they are very good, speaking of, you know, technology in these days, brilliant, you know, knowledge of technology. So they also work, you know, they have their sources within the country, within Russia. They also have some people on the ground they connect with, which is, of course, very important. So it's a new scenario, you know, and you could say that they even push, you know, the content they now make outside of Russia into Russia, you know. People can use VPNs, different things. And I also saw that, for example, Doxa, the winner here today, they are so competent, speaking of technology, that then when they launched their new webpage last week, You don't even need a VPN in Russia to open and read it. Let's see, it might go some days, but yeah. So I also know that some of the media outlets, they have started to translate some of their articles into English. So it's getting broader. They have had to hire more persons, more journalists coming to work, and their audience is bigger. So it's also this kind of lights, it's also a lot of positive things, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's very good to see all these innovative ways on how they're using social media, the new web page and all this.
Yeah.
But also, before we start talking a little bit more in detail about the doxa, one last question, because they're using these new ways because there was a development, right? Russia wasn't like this some years ago. How did we get there? What has happened in the recent years?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Hector. And I would first just make a comment to what you said about the legal diffusion of diffusion of legislation, which is a concept we have from the political sciences, which is called authoritarian diffusion. I mean, authoritarian states can actually teach other authoritarian states how to circumvent or create a new legality, as it were. And this new legality is, in complete breach with any constitution or any principle of freedom of speech and so forth. But again, since this is done gradually, people still believe that they live in the same country that adopted the constitution and the liberal media law, which they had in Russia. And suddenly they understand that now we're living in a completely different universe. What happened, right? So again, okay, your question was?
How did we get there? How did that happen?
Exactly. Well, it happened since when Medvedev, was a president in a short period, or 4 years actually, according to the constitution, from 2008 to 2012. He started a modernization program. So he wanted people to have smartphones, Twitter. He said in his speech, Forward Russia, that we have to modernize, we have to be more liberal, we have to get rid of, the past, we have to fight corruption, we should get away from the so-called krepadnichество, which is, when they had a lot of farmers that were actually bound to the soil in Russia and so forth. So he opened up a market for smartphones and a technology market. And once Russians got their smartphones and they got the technology market and they started to believe that he was actually liberalizing, they taught themselves how to read the law, how to interpret the law. They started all kinds of blogs, they started all kinds of social media, for instance, the Russian version of Facebook, the Vkontakte, and so forth. And there was a booming sector. And then Putin returned in 2012. And already from day one, it was clear that Putin was going in a completely different direction. He wanted to go back to what the so-called conservative values. And then, of course, friction developed very quickly between the urbanites in the large cities in the Russian Federation that wanted more liberal rights to express themselves in social media, for instance, to start their own YouTube channels, to pressure government on corruption issues and so forth. And of course, the front figure for this was Alexei Navalny and his YouTube channel and his way of communicating with young people. So Navalny was sort of, the first or the pioneer of that modernization age. And he has pulled a lot of young people with him. Now these young people are being charged by legislation that has just been amended the last couple of 3 years. Again, it wasn't a given that Russia was going to choose that path, but it was quite clear once Putin returned.
Yes, Ole Christian and then Ben.
Yeah, I made an interview the other day with one of the best journalists in Novaya Gazeta, Elena Mishina. Like she told me, this is also now a problem for the authorities because they don't get the truth. They don't know about all the corruption in the army. They don't know what is happening because there is no free media to tell them what's happening. So it's a kind of backlash for them.
Bente, you have a comment.
Yes, I just wanted to touch base about something of the same, but on a more practical level. For example, I mean, back in 2015, we had this project operating within Russia, only Russians working on the project. And it was quite open. This was back in 2015, you know. Some sort of, we believed it was possible, you know, to see some sort of, you know, more freedom of expression within the country. But then we saw slowly by slowly that people, you know, started, you know, to follow the journalists, you know, making recordings from meetings, you know, more political meetings, journalists' meetings, making recordings of them without letting, you know, the people recorded know about it. And they took it, for example, back home, and they went into the Facebook accounts of the different journalists, and they saw, well, you have participated in this demonstration and in this, etc. And they made this kind of smear campaign towards them, you know, even publishing it on, you know, Russian state television, that this person is working for, you know, some sort of, you know, foreign company, foreign foundation, etc. So it was quite obviously, I mean, this kind of direction started at least in 2015, you know, and being a journalist might also be, you know, very dangerous, you know. Like one of them, for example, just went out in the street in Moscow. He had a knife, just, you know, to scare you a little bit, you know. People might show up and, you know, harm you, not too much, but a little bit. So you might be very careful next time you do something the regime doesn't like, in a way. And we very seldom hear about these stories because people don't want to, you know, share them of fear, which is natural. But I think now, when the war has started, in a way, people outside, you know, it's time to speak up, in a way. Yeah.
If I could add a comment to that, sometimes you could also see that conflicts between what you call the state-controlled media and the new smartphone generation has been very acutely illustrated, for instance, with state-controlled media breaking into NGOs with their cameras and then demanding open interviews from the people working there directly while, you know, translating. So they use technology to intimidate people. And I remember when Grigory Milkonyan's, the leader of Golos, for instance, he had this state-controlled television company rushing into his NGO and demanding an interview. And he took up his smartphone and he held it up and he filmed them and he said, "Вы Kremlovskaya propaganda, вы Kremlovskaya propaganda, you are Kremlin propagandists, you are Kremlin propagandists." So you see, there's a sort of a generational media war going on here as well, between the people who know how to use the smartphone against an oppressive regime that uses the television, for instance. So here technology comes in. And it formats the conflict. A conflict for the right to express yourself, because Golos's work was important. Golos was doing electoral observation. They had stringers all over Russia that could report violations and so forth. And of course the regime knew, okay, this is dangerous, because, you know, Golos will see ballot stuffing, they will see bureaucrats doing things and so forth. So again, of course, the regime fears the smartphone generation, but this fear is now being transformed into something which is more dangerous because it's outright oppression.
Yeah. And I think something very clear here is when there's an attempt to consolidate power in an authoritarian way, it's media, one of the first targets. Like, you need to take out free media if you want to go in an authoritarian way. And what you mentioned of these reforms within the constitution, and people suddenly, you know, you wake up and you're like, oh, things have changed. There was a gradual hollowing out of institutions. And if you don't have free media, that gradual change, there's no one reporting on it. And that's where it is important, because you need free media to say, these small changes are happening, we're going in the wrong direction. And that's why there's that attack. But we know now that that's what Doxa is doing. It's reporting on these gradual changes and also on the big things, like, for example, the war on Ukraine right now. And there are editors you mentioned, it was also mentioned before, 4 of them were sent to house arrest, they had trials, they have faced the legal system. And you said they used this opportunity while being on trials to say, okay, this is an opportunity, I can give my message, I can speak out while being on trial. When we spoke before, you mentioned one of those editors, Geir, that had a good speech that made an impression on you. So I
Yes.
wanted to ask all of you if we can reflect a little bit, if you can share a little bit about these 4 editors, their story, their experience, maybe share some quotes on or comment on their work.
Well, of course I can. I took part of the speech, and I know that the others have read the speech as well, and I just translated it because this is Alla Gutnikova. She was one of the 4 editors that stood trials, and she used, as you said, she used the courtroom as a rostrum. She held a speech, and I have translated some part of it. I could read it for you. It's very touching. I often feel like a fish, a bird, a schoolboy, a baby. But recently, I was surprised to learn that Brodsky was also trialed when he was 23 years old. Brodsky is a very famous Soviet poet. And since I also was ranked among the human race, I will say this. In Kabbalah, there is the concept of tikkun olam, the correction of the world. I see that the world is not perfect. I believe that, as Yehuda Amichai wrote, the world was created beautiful in order to be good and for peace, like a bench in a garden, not a courtroom. I believe that the world was created for tenderness, hope, love, solidarity, passion, joy. But there's a terrible, unbearable amount of violence in the world. And I don't want violence, not in any form. No teacher's hands in the shirt of schoolgirls, no fists of a drunken father or the family in the bodies of wives and children. If I decided to list all the violence that is around, I would not have enough for a day, a week, or a year. To see the violence around, you just need to open your eyes. My eyes are open. I see violence, and I don't want violence. The more violence, the more I don't want it. And most of all, I do not want the greatest and most terrible violence.
And I think if we reflect on that, it's a 23-year-old student in a courtroom saying this speech. Do you want to share something more about the editors of Doxa?
Yeah, I can do it. I mean, they are so eloquent, and they use, the courtroom as a stage. This is also what we see here. And it's so, it's this lust for knowledge, which you can read, and when you listen to her words, it's brilliant. And the 4 editors, they made this little video back in April. They launched it 2021, and it was a video about, urging people to stand up and use their constitutional rights in a way. I also read an interview with the same editor, Geir, quoted now, and she said that in the video, they also said that, if you don't use your freedom of expression now, Russia will collapse in a way. And it's a way of bringing, the soul and the deep problematic, happening in Russia out in the courtroom in these kinds of words, which has made, a huge impression on people, I think,
Yes.
Her words, but also some of her colleagues' words.
Yeah. Ole Christian, did you have any comments on the editors?
Yes, like you said in the start, they mostly wrote about university and what is happening there, and bad things happening there. And then they have been very important writing about gender equality and also LGBT. Like today, the parliament in Moscow decided to have stricter laws about the so-called homosexuality propaganda. And that has been a lot of stories about that in their magazine. And of course, after February 24th, the war is very important, and they describe, for example, how people without any training is mobilized and sent to the ground in Ukraine. They write about the people dying before they go, even before they go there, because the training is not sufficient, and that there is no doctors, there is no health check, and like that. So I think like their new site is really good, and you can also follow them in Telegram. They have a really good Telegram account where they also update their stories in a way. So yeah.
Yeah, and just for publishing this video, they had this kind of house arrest for almost a year, as far as I understand,
exactly.
where they only were allowed to leave their homes 2 hours every morning, and they were denied access to the internet. So doing their work as editors was not possible anymore for a year. And I think they had to meet in court again after a year. And then they had this kind of, I mean, Geir,
there was also a term, I remember we talked about this,
yes.
Corrective labor.
Yes.
Well, there, we're talking about laws, but the way the laws are practiced is sometimes completely absurd. Among other things, again, back to the Navalny case, because when he was in Berlin, he was actually charged for violating his parole. Okay, so it doesn't make sense. But against these 4, the charges were basically that they were influencing minors to take part in illegal demonstrations, for which there was a punishment, also in the criminal code. But for some reason, the authorities chose not social labor, not enforced labor, but house arrest, as you said. Or maybe there's another word for it than that. Electronic foot link, whatever. I mean, so under the circumstances, relatively mild punishments. They could have been worse, but enough to keep them away out of attention or out of public attention. Again, that is something that the regime can do. If they want to, remove focus from these people, it's very simple just to arrest them for a year like this and then hope that they will disappear. But now Doxa is back, also thanks to you.
Yeah, and the regime is much tougher now than they were in April 2021. I mean, there was, after the war started, it was some demonstrations for 2 or 3 weeks or something. And after that, there has almost been nothing, because the police was so tough. They hit the demonstrators. They arrested about 6,000. 16,000.
Now it's actually 19,000.
19,000.
Yes, the last number I checked. Yeah.
So it's much stricter now than it was when Doxa was in court, actually.
Yeah. And we also I see that we'll soon have to wrap up. This is very interesting. But another thing I wanted to ask is, for the past 2 years, when we talk about the Nobel Peace Prize, there has been a focus also on journalism, freedom of press. And I remember there was a mention, there's a link here, or at least the recent Nobel Peace Prize has mentioned Doxa, or Doxa is also in their radar. Can anyone maybe share with the audience also what that connection there is?
Well, the factual background here is Memorial, which is a very old dissident NGO that started already during Soviet times, and that also built on the even older Helsinki committees in the Soviet Union. They have listed these 4 as political prisoners. And Memorial does that. They keep a list of people that are arrested, and they look at their cases, they look at the charges against them, and then they use international law or international legal frameworks to define whether this is actually political or not. And in this case, they decided it is political. Because, as they said in one statement, actually, that the charges that they were bringing minors out in illegal demonstrations and thus jeopardizing the security of the minors was absurd, because the only thing that threatened the security of the minors in these demonstrations was the brutalism of the police. So again, Memorial is one of the sharpest and most brilliant NGOs in Russia. Now also their archives are being, confiscated by the state.
Thank you. And as we move towards the end of the conversation, journalists, the role they're doing, Doc said, the role they're doing as journalists, how can we support it, or we're trying to bring some more attention with this prize to them as well. But from your experience, both through the work in Fritur or as a journalist,
I think it would be very important, I mean, for you, the students of Norway, to introduce them and their texts for the audience, and also the videos. That's the first thing you definitively should do, And also maybe make some sort of, a connection with one of the bigger media outlets, letting them write, for example, once a month or something, Because this might be very important, both for them and for us. And also this kind of showing solidarity, I mean, meeting Russia now in a time of boycott, It's very important, to include them in the Western society.
Christian, did you have any reflection?
Yes, I mean, it will be an end to this war. Perhaps this year, perhaps next year, perhaps in 10 years. But it's very important that the civil society in Russia is prepared for a new president, a new regime. And I think as a student magazine, they are very important for educating people. It's really difficult to get this information in Russia nowadays. Like I said, told about the universities, and even in schools, there is new rules now from this school year about how the teachers should teach about the regime, about the state. So it's really they do it all from the young people, and therefore student magazine is so important.
Yes.
And as was mentioned here also, the Russian journalists are really excellent. So, of course, this is some advertisement from my position. When you read these articles in the Russian language, you understand that civil society in Russia is not lost, because these articles are really sharp. They are very detailed in terms of what happens to the people that are arrested and so forth. But unfortunately, because of the language barrier, they're not always accessible. So again, do not forget the Russian language.
Yes. and I think it's also one of the main arguments when we in the peace committee were making the decision. It was also in the video and in the speech about recognizing the efforts of the people that are still living under authoritarianism. There are forces there. In many cases, it is students mainly that are speaking up, that are fighting against this. We need to recognize them, because there will be a next stage when it's how do we rebuild, how do we collaborate, and they need to know that they had allies throughout the path and that there were people that cared about them. And on that, a little bit more positive note, or looking forward, I want to ask you all for a final message to the audience, and also as a congratulations to Doxa. I don't know who wants to go first.
No, I just want to repeat what they said in the video. Don't cut the ties.
Thank you.
Yes, I mean, it will be very important that people get the truth. Truth is very difficult to get in Russia these days. So the truth is the main word, I think.
Right.
I would again, I think, appeal to students, because there is a thing called international law. There are institutions like the European Human Rights Council, for instance, that are important in addressing issues of international laws and international human rights. And there are many cases in that council that are Russian cases. So again, look into these institutions, orient yourself, see what is going on, and understand also that there are Russian NGOs that understand that human rights are central issues. Doxa do, Memorial does. So again, encourage them, learn what international law is about, and do care about human rights.
Yes. And we've heard now that Doxa is on Instagram, they have a new webpage, they have Telegram. I think it's our responsibility to also spread the word. One of the main goals with the Student Peace Prize is to raise awareness about the winner's work. And before I give the word to Mathea, I also just want to mention from that same speech from Alla Gudnikova, she quoted someone else, and she said that one of the things she had learned in history lessons was that you may crucify freedom, but the human soul knows no chains. And I think Doxa is a great example of that. Thank you.
Well done.
I think we can go yes.
Thank you all for such a great event. We are so proud to finally have revealed to you all who the Student Peace Prize winner of 2023 is. I am proud that we as a Norwegian student community are supporting the brave young Russian oppositionists. I hope the prize will set the spotlight on how important it is in times of war to reach out a hand to these Russian young oppositionists. To not forget about all the people that still are fighting the Russian regime within Russia. This resistance, it must be acknowledged, because this will be crucial for the reconstruction of a free and democratic Russia in the future. The war in Ukraine, it's inhuman and it's brutal. We stand in solidarity with all the people of Ukraine. We also mean that it is important to support the anti-war movement within Russia. This year, the Student Peace Prize is a recognition of the importance Doxa and student journalism has for freedom of speech, and therefore a contribution to peace. Before we end, I would like to thank all the people who have contributed to this event. A special thanks to Liv Jorunn and Ingrid Marie for have planned the event. The rest of the wonderful Student Peace Prize volunteer, I am both proud and humbled to have the opportunity to work with you. To all of the ISFIT volunteers, it is incredible to be in an organization with so many engaged and dedicated students. Thank you to the film team in ISFIT who made such a great movie about Doxa. Thank you to Micah and Bjørn Olav for their inspiring speech. Thank you to Hector for revealing who the winner was and for leading such a great panel discussion. Thank you to Bente, Geir, and Ole Christian for their talk. I learned a lot and it was very, very great. Thank you to Kulturutvalget here at Samfundet for hosting this event together with us. I would also like to thank all the teams here at Samfundet, Candice for their great performance, Videokomiteen, Forsterkerkomiteen, Regi, Kafé- og serveringsgjengen, Fotogjengen, and Sikring. And of course, thank you to everyone who came here today to celebrate and highlight yet another winner of the Student Peace Prize. I just want to inform you that Hollywood maybe has Walk of Fame, but here in Trondheim we do have Walk of Peace, where every winner every winner get their own stone. So next week you can go to Jomfrugata here in Trondheim to see another stone for Daxa. I would also like to inform you that SAI, they are having an event on the 8th of November about why dictators are so afraid of students at ISA Kultursenter here in Trondheim. And here, one of the Daxa editors, Mathea, who you saw in the video, she will participate digitally. So I recommend everyone to go there to get to know the Student Peace Prize winner even better. Yeah, the after party, it will not start until 10. So in the meanwhile, I recommend you to visit one of the many bars here at Samfundet. Yeah, I guess that was it. And thank you everyone for coming here today.